guys, hey, I'm just seeing if everything sounds okay, so let me know if it does. Oh, why the hell can I hear myself? Everything, so why can I hear myself? Let me know if it does. Oh, why the hell can I hear myself? Oh, because I have myself on this side. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay. Okay. Hey guys, I think it's good. Okay. I'm always nervous when starting up because I want the sound to be alright, but I think it's okay. You might notice that I have some ambience on. It's really bright. Jeez. I have some ambient sounds on, so I think that would be cool. It's kind of like a tavern with some fireplace crackling. Does that sound okay? Let me know. I thought it would fit, the kind of chilled out vibe of this stream, so I'm just noticing everything wrong with me at the moment. Breathe, Lisa. So let's see who we have here. We've got Kaju King, Bo, Derek, Drew. Who else have we got? Got a couple of you here already. +1 for ambience. That's good. That's good to hear. I've got gas. Yeah, I tried putting ambience on before, and I did it in a kind of convoluted way, but I figured if I just have it on my laptop, it works too. So, I think that might actually sound better because now it sounds kind of directional, so it's kind of super hyper realistic. Totally. Let's see. Ooh, we've got Bryn too. Hi. So yeah, welcome again. I know we just had a stream last week, but I think it works out this way, so I don't have to stress about having to stream when I'm on my vacation, and I can just do it now and not have to worry about that. It's possibly not having time, etc. So thank you so much for what do you call that? For allowing me to do this, I guess. I'm so weird today, and I had a cup of coffee after dinner, so I'm a little bit high on energy. Kinetic energy, I guess. Anyway, I hope that you're all doing well. As always. Oh, I should probably turn my phone off, because if I don't, it might go off. There we go. I think I turned down. Oh, you like the indigo pick? Yeah, I figured I'd try something else than the chibis, and Josh actually made that one transparent for me, so I can use those. So that's really cool. I'm always weird. That's why I love it. That is probably true. I think at this point I should just embrace it with all my heart. Okay, what do we have today? So I got my vape today, and what I'm vaping is, it's by Vape Knots, and let's see. It's kind of a citrusy type thing. That's a plane, by the way. It's a very loud plane. Gosh. I don't know. It's really nice. It's part of a series of vape juices. Let me just grab that. This set by Vape Knots that I bought a while ago, and it's so nice. It's like a little, it's not velvet, it's like, what do you call that in English? I don't know what you call this fabric, but it's like kind of like made from like wool, you know, with soap. I don't know how you call it. It's a plain or a dragon. I'll go with dragon. Yeah, I think this one is the one that I'm using right now. It's called Perfect Day. And they're all kind of like modeled after times of day. This is like pure morning, sunny afternoon, blue moon, and night flight. I really like that. I think fleece, no, I don't think that's the right word. Felt, yeah, felt. Gosh, of course it does want to work with me, but it's kind of like a night sky type of thing. You can kind of see what it looks like. Oh, there you go. It's really cool, right? I like it. But yeah, felt is the right word. So I really like this brand of vape juice. They're a little bit more expensive than what I'd normally get. Yeah, it's Vape Knots 24, as in 24 hours. That's what this set is called. But they're really nice. They're a French brand. The other week I was also vaping something by then. I think it was Under the Sea of their Around the World series. So, you know. And I talk about it because I always get questions about what are you vaping. So I figured I'd just like nape vapes. So like something with like the nape of your neck. Now I'm thinking of that weird video I saw. Let's just start off with the weird shit right away, I guess. And I once walked into my little brother's room when he was sitting with a friend, and they were watching this really weird porn video. This is how my story started, right? Is that a plane? No, it's just a dragon. And it was like this weird video where this young girl goes to her family doctor, and it turns out that she hasn't started her period yet, and she's like 17 years old. And then the doctor finds out that her vagina is like in the nape of her neck, basically. And, you know, he diagnoses that, and then like it's a porn, right? So he fucks her in the neck, right? And it's pretty out there. You can actually watch it on Pornhub, obviously. I'll let you figure out how to find it. But there's like this weird scene where it actually comes out of her mouth. It's really messed up. So yeah, I guess that's nape vage now. I don't know why. Yeah, it's so weird. But yeah, I just walked into my brother watching that one day with his friend, and I mean, obviously they were watching it like ironically, you know. But it was just like, dude. Anyway, yeah, it was definitely awkward. Hi, welcome back. You missed me having a really awkward story, so yeah, that's okay. And anyway, and then also got some beer. Just my German Weissbier, or you know, white beer, Benedictiner Weissbier, beer. I'm not sure proper way to pronounce this, but it is from Etal, Germany. Weissbier. Yeah, it's pretty light beer, all things considered. It's 5.4, and then I got my Duvel a glass, which I really like, and I literally just bought it because it had this on it. So, do you have any not awkward stories? I guess I do, but they're just too boring, you know. Oh, just pour this puppy out. I always mess up because of the shape of the glass. I always mess up. I always overestimate or underestimate or whatever. So the head is like way too big. Whatever. I'm good with normal glasses, but these specialty glasses are always tricky. I actually used to work like behind a bar. I did bartending, which sounds fancier than it was really. It was mostly just in a youth center, and I did some like family parties and stuff. But I do actually have my like official certificate. Yeah. Normally I make better head, give better head, and it's wrong. But thanks, Cass, for setting me up for failure with the stupid comments like I just made. Holy fuck. You know what? It'll do. It'll do. Cass never behaves. So yeah, come make glass here. Don't spill, Lisa. Cheers. You don't have to drink with me, of course, but if you're gonna sit and watch the stream, you should probably have something to drink, though. At least some water, so you're nice and hydrated, just like I have right here. I've got my tentacle cup. I got it as a free gift with the order of the tentacle pillow. I don't know if you can see it. You can't really see it. You know, the one Nora also has, David, that I got as a gift from Taylor Poe. So yeah. Ah yes, Josh has the same one and the same cup as well. The cup is nice. I really like these tumbler cups because it just holds a lot of drink, and I drink a lot of water, so yeah. A beer, vape, and some get straight. What more can one ask for? Exactly. That's what I'm here for. Oh, and by the way, I got this new shirt the other day. It's like a crop top, but I'm wearing like a high-waisted skirt underneath. But I quite like it. I normally have things with like a wider collar, but I think it's kind of cool. I think it's a cool aesthetic. And I always like, you know, like black shirts, but it has kind of like those gray stripes. Kind of, I don't know, makes it look cool, I think. Usually drink wine out of mine for spill proof. That's horrible. I mean, it holds like half a liter or something. That's horrible. But I mean, smart. Thank you, Jason. No, I like it. Wine and liquor go in a glass. That's true. I think like lemonade and water is about the only stuff I drink from plastic glasses. I don't know, because I don't know, it's something about like plastic does give like a bit of a taste to what you're drinking mostly, so that's why. When your wine comes out of a box, all rules go out of the window. That's actually true. Yeah, that's actually true. I'm gonna be popping in and out of this slime stream at Scare LA. What's Scare LA? I feel like I've heard that before, but I'm not sure if I can place it. Kaz, you're saying boxed wine is a crime? You're one to talk with fucking bagged milk, like fucking Canadians say. But yeah, I've had boxed wine before, but that was like when I was young and like I wanted to get absolutely fucked up on like, you know, $2. Let me have this, Cass. Seriously, like there's not that many things you can talk shit about Canada for, but like bagged milk is like, you know, their most heinous crime as a nation. Exactly, Jason, exactly. Bagged milk, like Malkavians in a bag. There's probably a Malkavian out there that just wears trash bags. I remember when I was in year 8 in school, in basic school, and for a Halloween party, I wanted to dress up as a bat, and how I did that was literally just like, oh, I need something black, so I just cut 2 holes in like a trash bag, well, 3 holes I guess, in a trash bag, and wore that. I thought I was hot shit in that trash bag. That sounds like a horror story you would tell your kids, you know, like behave or you're gonna have to drink the bag milk. I mean, I'll be honest, like I never like drinking milk as is. I think it doesn't really taste good. And I used to drink Carna milk, which is like a sour type of milk, which is kind of like liquid yogurt basically. I really like that, but not normal milk. And now obviously I just tend to have almond milk with stuff. By the way, I don't know if you guys remember, we're actually gonna finish the book today. Because we only have like 3 chapters left. Oh, there we go, there we go. So let's see. What happened again? What happened again? Okay, so he found the woman, and she actually came back. She came back to his house, or well, he dragged her with him, and she had like a dodgy story. Like there were like so many holes in the story that she had. And it turned out she was actually a vampire, because he already had suspicions, and when he finally tested her blood, she like hit him on the forehead with a mallet, and it turned out that her tan was like spray on tan, so she had just been lying all this time. And the last chapter ended with her just knocking him unconscious. And this was like the last woman that, you know, on the world, basically, as far as he knows. It's the first human being that he ran into that he thought wasn't necessarily at least a bloodthirsty, dangerous vampire. Let's see. Scaredly is a big Halloween convention that goes on here. That's interesting that a Halloween convention would go on in August, but that is cool. I do hope you have fun. Beat his head in until he passed out. I mean, you know, same difference. So this guy, he has been to a lot of shit, Robert. But where did I put my book? When my microphone is over there. Let's see. There we go. There we go. Halloween should be year-round. Should just replace every major holiday, to be honest. Especially Christmas. Not a fan, as most people know. Yeah, so I'm really curious to see how this all is gonna pan out for him. Okay, I'm spoiling myself. Okay, so let's do some story time, guys. Chapter 19. When he opened his eyes, there was no sound in the house. He lay there a moment looking confusedly at the floor. Then, with a startled grunt, he sat up. A package of needles exploded in his head, and he slumped down on the cold floor, hands pressed to his throbbing skull. A clicking sound filled his throat as he lay. After a few minutes, he pulled himself up slowly by gripping the edge of the bench. The floor undulated beneath him as he held on tightly, eyes closed, legs wavering. A minute later, he managed to stumble into the bathroom. There, he threw cold water in his face and sat on the bathtub edge, pressing a cold, wet cloth to his forehead. What had happened? He kept blinking and staring at the white tiled floor. He stood up and walked slowly into the living room. It was empty. The front door stood half open in the gray of early morning. She was gone. Then he remembered. He struggled back into the bedroom, using the walls to guide him. The note was on the bench, next to the overturned microscope. He picked up the paper with numbed fingers and carried it to the bed. Sinking down with a groan, he held the letter before his eyes. But the letters blurred and ran. He shook his head and pressed his eyes shut. After a little while, he read, Robert, now you know that I was spying on you. Know that almost everything I told you was a lie. I'm writing this note, though, because I want to save you if I can. When I was first given the job of spying on you, I had no feelings about your life. Because I did have a husband, Robert. You killed him. But now it's different. I know now that you were just as much forced into your situation as we were forced into ours. We are infected, but you already know that. What you don't understand yet is that we're going to stay alive. We found a way to do that, and we're going to set up society again slowly but surely. We're going to do away with all those wretched creatures whom death has cheated. And even though I pray otherwise, we may decide to kill you and those like you. Those like me? He thought with a start, but he kept reading. I'll try to save you. I'll tell them you're too well armed for us to attack now. Use the time I'm giving you, Robert. Get away from your house, go into the mountains and save yourself. There are only a handful of us now, but sooner or later we will be too well organized, and nothing I say will stop the rest from destroying you. For God's sake, Robert, go now while you can. I know you may not believe this. You may not believe that we can live in the sun for short periods now. You may not believe that my tan was only makeup. You may not believe that we can live with the germ now. That's why I'm leaving one of my pills. I took them all the time I was here. I kept them in a belt around my waist. You'll discover that they're a combination of defibrinated blood and a drug. I don't know myself just what it is. The blood feeds the germs. The drug prevents multiplication. It was the discovery of this pill that saved us from dying, and that is helping set up society again slowly. Believe me, it's true. And escape. Forgive me, too. I didn't mean to hit you. It nearly killed me to do it. But I was so terribly frightened of what you do when you found out. Forgive me for having to lie to you about so many things. But please believe this. When we were together in the darkness, close to each other, I wasn't spying on you. I was loving you. Ruth. He read the letter again. Then his hands fell forward, and he sat there staring with empty eyes at the floor. He couldn't believe it. He shook his head slowly and tried to understand, but adjustment eluded him. He walked unsteadily to the bench. He picked up the small amber pill and held it in his palm. Smelled it, tasted it. He felt as if all the security of reason were ebbing away from him. The framework of his life was collapsing, and it frightened him. Yet, how did he refute the evidence? The pill, the tan coming off her leg, her walking in the sun, her reaction to garlic. He sank down on the stool and looked at the mallet lying on the floor. Slowly, ploddingly, his mind went over the evidence. When he'd first seen her, she'd run from him. Had it been a ruse? No, she'd been genuinely frightened. She must have been startled by his cry then, even though she'd been expecting it and forgotten all about her job. Then later, when she'd calmed down, she'd talked him into thinking that her reaction to garlic was the reaction of a sick stomach. And she had lied and smiled and feigned hopeless acceptance and carefully got all the information she'd been sent after. And when she'd wanted to leave, she couldn't because of Cortman and the others. He had awakened then. They had embraced. They had... His white-knuckled fist jolted down onto the bench. I was loving you. Lie. Lie. His fingers crumpled up the letter and flung it away, bitterly. Rage made the pain in his head flare hotly, and he pressed both hands against it and closed his eyes with a groan. Then he looked up. Slowly he slid off the stool and placed the microscope back onto the base. The rest of her letter wasn't a lie. He knew that. Without the pill, without any evidence of word or memory, he knew. He knew what even Ruth and her people didn't seem to know. He looked into the eyepiece for a long time. Yes, he knew. And the admission of what he saw changed his entire world. How stupid and ineffective he felt for having never foreseen it. especially after reading the phrase 100, 1,000 times. But then he'd never really appreciated it. Such a short phrase it was, but meaning so much. Bacteria can mutate. Ooh. That's the first chapter of today. And let's see. Yes, it's going to be up on YouTube. It'll be the same link as I linked on Patreon. Well, it won't be public, right? But you'll still be able to watch it on Unlisted. Just like Bo said. So what do you guys think about this information bomb? The plot definitely thickens. For some reason I did not expect that, but then again I just kind of let everything wash over me and don't really start theory crafting until after everything's said and done, but So apparently they're organized in some way. She was sent as a spy, which I find interesting because I don't know. I'm not sure why exactly they would send her specifically, especially since she, as she admitted, had her husband killed by him. I'm not sure why that makes her well equipped to spy on him specifically. And I also wonder who her husband was, because it doesn't seem like he recognized her, so it's not like someone that he knew about, like someone in the neighborhood, like he would. So, but I'm sure they'll reveal that if they don't reveal who exactly her husband was, or maybe it was just a random vampire who he killed, but I'm not sure. Well, I mean, if they've been spying on him, I mean, they could have been spying on him by going to his house at night and just blend in with the other vampires. And, I mean, they could have even spied on him with the whole dog situation, which would kind of imply that, you know, he's pretty starved for any sort of, like, interaction with another living being. And sending a woman, you know, would make sense that he would, you know, try and do everything in his power to you know, be able to interact and connect with her over a prolonged period of time. I'm not sure. I'm just curious how organized they are and like how many of them there are, because he's just one guy in a house, right? Like, and if they have these pills and if it mutates and stuff, but they do have the garlic weakness. But I mean, like, how many vampires would it take to tear the house down, you know, if they could. Okay, let's just keep reading. Okay. Part 4. January 1979. Chapter 20. That's a plane. Let me just wait. Luring him like that with a victim smart tactic, to be honest, is far better than the movie adaptation. I think I'm gonna watch the movie just to see how they change it, because the last time I saw the movie is like 10 years ago, easily. Oh god, 10 years ago I was 16. I thought it was yesterday. Fuck, I'm old. I feel old. Correction. Okay, anyway. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in seeing that again. But I prefer the book from my memory anyways. Okay. They came by night. Came in their dark cars with their spotlights and their guns and their axes and pikes. Came from the blackness with a great sound of motors, the long wide arms of their spotlights snapping around the boulevard corner and clutching out at Cimarron streets. Robert Neville was sitting at the peephole when they came. He had put down a book and was sitting there, watching idly when the beam splashed white across the bloodless vampire faces, and they whirled with a gasp, their dark animal eyes staring at the blinding lights. Neville jumped back from the peephole, his heart thudding with abrupt shock. For a moment he stood there trembling in a dark room, unable to decide what to do. His throat contracted, and he heard the roar of car motors even through the soundproofing on his house. He thought of the pistols in his bureau, the submachine gun on his workbench, thought of defending his house against them. Then he pressed his fingers in until the nails dug at his palms. No, he'd made his decision. He'd worked it out carefully through the past months. He would not fight. With a heavy, sinking sensation in the pit of his stomach, he stepped back to the people and looked out. The street was a scene of gushing, violent action illuminated by the bald glare of the spotlights. Men rushed at men, the sound of running boots covered the pavements. Then a shot rang out, echoing hollowly. More shots. 2 male vampires went thrashing down onto their sides. 4 men grabbed them by the arms and jerked them up while the other 2 men drove the glittering lance point of their pikes into the vampire's chest. Neville's face twitched as screams filled the night. He felt his chest shuddering with labored breaths as he watched from his house. The dark-suited men knew exactly what they were doing. There were about 7 vampires visible, 6 men and a woman. The men surrounded the 7, held their flailing arms and drove razor-tipped pikes deep into their bodies. Blood spouted onto the dark pavement, and the vampires perished one by one. Neville felt himself shivering more and more. Is this the new society? The words flashed across his mind. He tried to believe that the men were forced into what they were doing, but shock brought terrible doubt. Did they have to do it like this, with such a black and brutal slaughtering? Why did they slay with allurum by night, when by day the vampires could be dispatched in peace? Robert Neville felt tight fists shaking at his sides. He didn't like the looks of them. He didn't like the methodical butchery. They were more like gangsters than men forced into a situation. There were looks of vicious triumph on their faces, white and stark in the spotlights. Their faces were cruel and emotionless. Suddenly Neville felt himself shudder violently, remembering. Where was Ben Cortman? His eyes fled over the street, but he couldn't see Cortman. He pressed against the peephole and looked up and down the street. He didn't want them to get Cortman, he realized. Didn't want them to destroy Cortman like that. With a sense of inward shock he could not analyze in the rush of the moment, he realized that he felt more deeply toward the vampires than he did towards their executioners. Now the 7 vampires lay crumpled and still in their pools of stolen blood. The spotlights were moving around the streets, flaying open the night. Neville turned his head away as the brilliant glare blazed across the front of his house. Then the spotlight had turned about, and he looked again. A shout. Neville's eyes jumped toward the focus of the spotlight. He stiffened. Cortman was on the roof of the house across the street. He was pulling himself up towards the chimney, body flattened on the shingles. Abruptly it came to Neville that it was in that chimney that Ben Cortman had hidden most of the time, and he felt a wrench of despair at the knowledge. His lips pressed together tightly. Why hadn't he looked more carefully? He couldn't fight the sick apprehension he felt at the thought of Cortman being killed by these brutal strangers. Objectively, it was pointless, but he could not repress the feeling. Cortman was not theirs to put to rest, but there was nothing he could do. With bleak, tortured eyes, he watched the spotlights cluster on Cortman's wriggling body. He watched the white hands reaching out slowly for handfolds on the roof. Slowly, slowly, as if Cortman had all the time in the world. Hurry up! Neville felt himself twitch with the unspoken words as he watched. He felt himself straining with Cortman's agonizingly slow movements. The men did not shout, they did not command. They raised their rifles now, and the night was torn open again with their exploding fire. Neville almost felt the bullets in his own flesh. His body jerked with convulsive shudders as he watched Cortman's body jerk under the impact of the bullets. Still, Cortman kept crawling, and Neville saw his white face, his teeth gritted together. The end of Oliver Hardy, he thought, the death of all comedy and all laughter. He didn't hear the continuous fusillade of shots. He didn't even feel the tears running down his cheeks. His eyes were riveted on the ungainly form of his old friend inching up the brightly lit roof. Now Cortman rose up, on his knees and clutched at the chimney edge with spasmodic fingers. His body lurched as more bullets struck. His dark eyes glared into the blinding spotlights. His lips were drawn back in a soundless snarl. Then he was standing up beside the chimney, and Neville's face was white and taut as he watched Cortman start to raise his right leg. And then the hammering machine gun splattered Cortman's flesh with lead. For a moment Cortman stood erect in the hot blast, palsied hands raised high over his head, a look of berserk defiance twisting his white features. "Ben," Neville muttered in a croaking whisper. Ben Cortman's body folded, slumped forward, fell. It slid and rolled slowly down the shingled incline and then dropped into space. In the sudden silence, Neville heard the thump of it from across the street. Sick-eyed, he watched the men rush at the writhing body with their pikes. Then Neville closed his eyes and his nails dug furrows in the flesh of his palms. A clumping of boots. Neville jerked back into the darkness. He stood in the middle of the room, waiting for them to call him and tell him to come out. He held himself rigidly. "I'm not going to fight," he told himself strongly, even though he wanted to fight, even though he already hated the dark men with their guns and their blood-stained pikes. But he wasn't going to fight. He had worked out his decision very carefully. They were doing what they had to do, albeit with unnecessarily violence and seeming relish. He had killed their people, and they had to capture him and save themselves. He would not fight. He'd throw himself upon the justice of their new society. When they called to him, he would go out and surrender. It was his decision. But they didn't call. Neville lurched back with a gasp as the axe blade bit deeply into the front door. He stood trembling in the dark living room. What were they doing? Why didn't they call on him to surrender? He wasn't a vampire. He was a man like them. What were they doing? He whirled and stared at the kitchen. They were chopping at the boarded-up back door, too. He took a nervous step toward the hallway. His frightened eyes rushed from the back to the front door. He felt his heart pumping. He didn't understand. He didn't understand. With a grunt of shocked surprise, he jumped into the hall as the enclosed house rang with gun explosion. The men were shooting away the lock on the front door. Another reverberating shot made his ears ring. And then, suddenly, he knew. They weren't going to take him to their courts, to their justice. They were going to exterminate him. With a frightened murmur, he ran into the bedroom. His hands fumbled in the bureau drawer. He straightened up on trembling legs, the gun in his hands. But what if they were going to take him prisoner? He'd only judged by the fact that they hadn't called on him to come out. There were no lights in the house. Maybe they thought he was already gone. He stood shivering in the darkness of the bedroom, not knowing what to do, mutters of terror filling his throat. Why hadn't he left? Why hadn't he listened to her and left? Fool! One of his guns fell from his nerveless fingers as the front door was crushed in. Heavy feet thudded into the living room, and Robert Neville shuffled back across the floor, his remaining pistol held out with rigid, blood-drained fingers. They weren't going to kill him without a fight. He gasped as he collided with the bench. He stood there, tautly. In the front room a man said something he couldn't understand, then flashlight beams shone into the hall. Neville caught his breath. He felt the room spinning around him. So this is the end. It was the only thing he could think. So this is the end. Heavy shoes thumped in the hall. Neville's fingers tightened still more on the pistol, and his eyes stared with wild fright at the doorway. 2 men came in. Their white beams played around the room, struck his face. The 2 men recoiled abruptly. "He's got a gun," one of them cried, and fired his pistol. Neville heard the bullet smash into the wall over his head. Then the pistol was jolting in his hand, splashing his face with bursts of light. He didn't fire at any one of them, he just kept pulling the trigger automatically. One of the men cried out in pain. Then Neville felt a violent club blow across his chest. He staggered back, then jagged, burning pain exploded in his body. He fired once more, then crashed to his knees, the pistol slipping from his fingers. "You got him," he heard someone cry as he fell on his face. He tried to reach out for the pistol, but a dark boot stamped on his hand and broke it. Neville drew in his hand with a rattling gasp and stared through the pain-glazed eyes at the floor. Rough hands slid under his armpits and pulled him up. He kept wondering when they would shoot him again. Virch, he thought. Virch, I'm coming with you now. The pain in his chest was like molten lead poured over him from a great height. He felt and heard his boot tips scraping over the floor and waited for death. I want to die in my own house, he thought. He struggled feebly, but they didn't stop. Hot pain raked saw-toothed nails across his chest as they dragged him through the front door. No, he groaned, no. Then pain surged up from his chest and drove a barbed club into his brain. Everything began spinning away into blackness. Virch, he muttered in a hoarse whisper. And the dark man dragged his lifeless body from the house, into the night, into the world that was theirs and no longer his. Dun dun dun. Damn. That's crazy. That's like a lot of development in like the final stretch. Damn. Not even sure what to feel at this point. I feel bad for him. I mean, he's definitely not gonna make it, I feel. What do you guys think? I think F. He's dead now, sorry to say, pretty much. How much shit can these guys go through? I know, right? I feel like... I mean, there's only like a couple pages left. I feel... It feels kind of pointless, like the you know, all the time we spent researching and working on his thing, also only for him to be dragged out, you know, like half dead. Like, do they have some sort of plan for him? Or, I mean, it did surprise me that they didn't outright kill him, or at least try to. Obviously they have some sort of plans with him, otherwise why would they drag him out of his house? But if they're gonna mortally wound him, like, this is very curious to me. The book might end on a cliffhanger, I don't know. I do know it's like the only book. There's not like a sequel or anything, as far as I know. I think we should just keep reading. I want to know now. Okay. Chapter 21. Sounds. A murmured rustle in the air. Robert Neville coughed weakly, then grimaced as the pain filled his chest. A bubbling groan passed his lips and his head rolled slightly onto the flat pillow. The sound grew stronger. It became a rumbling mixture of noises. His hands drew in slowly at his sides. Why didn't they take the fire off his chest? He could feel hot coals dropping through openings in his flesh. Another groan, agonized and breathless, twitching his graying lips. Then his eyes fluttered open. He stared at the rough plaster ceiling for a full minute without blinking. Pain ebbed and swelled in his chest with an endless, nerve-clutching throb. His face remained a taut-lined mask of resistance to the pain. If he relaxed for a second, it enveloped him completely. He had to fight it. For the first few minutes he could only struggle with the pain, suffering beneath its hot stabbing. Then, after a while, his brain began to function, slowly, like a machine faltering, starting and stopping, turning and jamming gears. Where am I? It was his first thought. The pain was awful. He looked down at his chest and saw that he was bound with a wide bandage, a great moist spot of red rising and falling, jerkily in the middle of it. He closed his eyes and swallowed. I'm hurt, he thought. I'm hurt badly. His mouth and throat felt powdery dry. Where am I? What am I? Then he remembered. The dark man and the attack on his house. and he knew where he was even before he turned his head slowly, achingly, and saw the barred windows across the tiny cubicle. He looked at the windows for a long time, face tight, teeth clenched together. The sound was outside, the rushing, confused sound. He let his head roll back onto the pillow and lay staring at the ceiling. It was hard to understand the moment on its own terms. Hard to believe it wasn't all a nightmare. Over 3 years alone in his house, now this. But he couldn't doubt the sharp shifting pain in his chest, and he couldn't doubt the way the moist red spot kept getting bigger and bigger. He closed his eyes. I'm going to die, he thought. He tried to understand that, but that didn't work either. In spite of having lived with death all these years, in spite of having walked a tightrope of bare existence across an endless maw of death, in spite of that he couldn't understand it. Personal death still was a thing beyond comprehension. He was still on his back when the door behind him opened. He couldn't turn, it hurt too much. He lay there and listened to the footsteps approach the bed, then stop. He looked up, but the person hadn't come into view yet. My executioner, he thought, the justice of this new society. He closed his eyes and waited. The shoes moved again until he knew the person was by the cot. He tried to swallow, but his throat was too dry. He ran his tongue over his lips. Are you thirsty? He looked up with dulled eyes at her, and suddenly his heart began throbbing. The increased blood flow made the pain billow up and swallow him for a moment. He couldn't cut off the groan of agony. He twisted his head on the pillow, biting his lips and clutching at the blanket feverishly. The red spot grew bigger. She was on her knees now, patting perspiration from his brow, touching his lips with a cool, wet cloth. The pain began to subside slowly and her face came into gradual focus. Neville lay motionless, staring at her with pain-filled eyes. So, he finally said. She didn't answer. She got up and sat on the edge of the bed. She patted his brow again. Then she reached over his head and he heard the pouring of water into a glass. The pain dug razors into him, and she lifted his head a little so he could drink. This is what they must have felt when the pikes went into them, he thought. This cutting, biting agony, the escape of life's blood. His head fell back onto the pillow. Thank you, he murmured. She sat looking down at him, a strange mix of sympathy and detachment in her face. Her reddish hair was drawn back into a tight cluster behind her head and clipped there. She looked very clean-cut and self-possessed. You wouldn't believe me, would you? She said. A little cough puffed out of his cheeks. His mouth opened and he sucked in some of the damp morning air. I believed you, he said. Then why didn't you go? He tried to speak, but the words jumbled together. His throat moved and he drew in another, faltering breath. I couldn't, he muttered. I almost went several times. Once I even packed and started out. But I couldn't go. I was too used to the house. It was a habit, just like the habit of living. I got used to it. Her eyes ran over his sweat-greased face, and she pressed her lips together as she patted his forehead again. It's too late now, she said then. You know that, don't you? Something clicked in his throat as he swallowed. I know, he said. He tried to smile, but his lips only twitched. Why did you fight them? She said. They had orders to bring you in unharmed. If you hadn't fired at them, they wouldn't have harmed you. His throat contracted. What difference? He gasped. His eyes closed, and he gritted his teeth tightly to force back the pain. When he opened them again, she was still there. Let me see. There we go. When he opened them again, she was still there. The expression on her face had not changed. His smile was weak and tortured. Your society is certainly a fine one, he gasped. Who are those gangsters who came to get me? The Council of Justice? Her look was dispassionate. She's changed, he thought suddenly. New societies are always primitive, she answered. You should know that. In a way, we're like a revolutionary group, repossessing society by violence. It's inevitable. Violence is no stranger to you. You've killed many times. Only to survive. That's exactly why we're killing, she said calmly. To survive. We can't allow the dead to exist beside the living. Their brains are impaired. They exist for only one purpose. They have to be destroyed. As one who killed the dead and the living, you know that. The deep breath he took made the pain wrench at his insides. His eyes were stark with pain as he shuddered. It's got to end soon, he thought. I can't stand any more of this. No, death did not frighten him. He didn't understand it, but he didn't fear it either. The swelling pain sank down as the clouds passed from his eyes. He looked up at her calm face. I hope so, he said. But did you see their faces when they killed? His throat moved convulsively. Joy, he mumbled. Pure joy. Her smile was thin and withdrawn. She has changed, he thought, entirely. Did you ever see your face? She asked. When you killed? She patted his brow with the cloth. I saw it, remember? It was frightening, and you weren't even killing them, you were just chasing me. He closed his eyes. Why am I listening to her, he thought. She's become a brainless convert to this new violence. Maybe you did see joy on their faces, she said. It's not surprising. They're young, and they are killers, assigned killers, legal killers. They are respected for their killing, admired for it. What can you expect from them? They're only fallible men, and men can learn to enjoy killing. That's an old story, Neville. You know that. He looked up at her. Her smile was the tight, forced smile of a woman who was trying to forego being a woman in favor of her dedication. Robert Neville, she said, the last of the old race. Sorry. His face tightened. Last, he muttered, feeling the heavy sinking of utter loneliness in him. As far as we know, she said casually, you are quite a unique. You know, when you're gone, there won't be anyone else like you within our particular society. He looked toward the window. Those are people outside, he said. She nodded. They're waiting. For my death? For your execution, she said. He felt himself tighten as he looked up at her. You'd better hurry, he said, without fear, with a sudden defiance in his hoarse voice. They looked at each other for a long moment, and then something seemed to give in her. Her face grew blank. I knew it, she said softly. I knew you wouldn't be afraid. Impulsively, she put her hand over his. When I first heard that they were ordered to your house, I was going to go there and warn you. But then I knew that if you were still there, nothing would make you go. Then I was going to try to help you escape after they brought you in, but they told me you'd been shot, and I know that escape was impossible too. A smile flitted over her lips. I'm glad you're not afraid, she said. You're very brave. Her voice grew soft. Robert. They were silent, and he felt her hand tighten on his. How is it you can come in here? He asked then. I'm a ranking officer in the new society, she said. His hand stirred under hers. Don't let it get... He coughed up blood. Don't let it get too brutal, too heartless. What can I... She started, then stopped. She smiled at him. I'll try, she said. He couldn't go on. The pain was getting worse. It twisted and turned like a clutching animal in his body. Ruth leaned over him. Robert, she said, listen to me. They mean to execute you, even though you're wounded. They have to. The people have been out here all night waiting. They're terrified of you, Robert. They hate you, and they want your life. She reached up quickly and unbuttoned her blouse. Reaching under her brassiere, she took out a tiny packet and pressed it into his right palm. It's all I can do, Robert, she whispered, to make it easier. I warned you. I told you to go. Her voice broke a little. You just can't fight so many, Robert. I know. The words were gagging sounds in his throat. For a moment she stood over his bed, a look of natural compassion on her face. It was all a pose, he thought, her coming in here and being so official. She was afraid to be herself. I can understand that. Ruth bent over him and her cool lips pressed on his. "You'll be with her soon," she murmured hastily. Then she straightened up, her lips pressed together tightly. She buttoned up the 2 top buttons of her blouse. A moment longer she looked down at him. Then her eyes glanced at his right hand. "Take them, soon," she murmured, and then turned away quickly. He heard her footsteps moving across the floor. Then the door was shutting, and he heard the sound of it being locked. He closed his eyes and felt warm tears pushing out from beneath the lids. Goodbye, Ruth. Goodbye, everything. Then suddenly he drew in a quick breath. Bracing himself, he pushed himself to a sitting position. He refused to let himself collapse at the burning pain that exploded in his chest. Teeth grating together, he stood up on his feet. For a moment he almost fell, but catching his balance, he stumbled across the floor on vibrating legs he could hardly feel. He fell against the window and looked out. The street was filled with people. They milled and stirred in the grey light of morning, the sound of their talking like the buzzing of a million insects. He looked out over the people, his left hand gripping the bars with bloodless fingers, his eyes fever-lit. Then someone saw him. For a moment there was an increased babbling of voices, a few startled cries. Then sudden silence, as though a heavy blanket had fallen over their heads. They all stood looking up at him with their white faces. He stared back, and suddenly he thought, I'm the abnormal one now. Normalcy was a majority concept, the standard of many, and not the standard of just one man. Abruptly, that realization joined with what he on their faces. Awe, fear, shrinking horror, and he knew that they were afraid of him. To them, he was some terrible scourge they had never seen, a scourge even worse than the disease they had come to live with. He was an invisible spectre who had left for evidence of his existence the bloodless bodies of their loved ones. And he understood what they felt, and did not hate them. His right hand tightened on the tiny envelope of pills. So long as the ends did not come with violence, so long as it did not have to be a butchery before their eyes. Robert Neville looked out over the new people of the earth. He knew he did not belong to them. He knew that, like the vampires, he was anathema and black terror to be destroyed. Then, abruptly, the concept came, amusing to him even in his pain. A coughing chuckle filled his throat. He turned and leaned against the wall while he swallowed the pills. Full circle, he thought, while the final lethargy crept into his limbs. Full circle, a new terror born in death, a new superstition entering the unassailable fortress of forever. I am legend. Fiend. Holy shit. I don't know what to say. But I did not expect that. Wow, that's crazy. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a cliffhanger because it does kind of spell out that he's gonna die and that there's just like a new society that's being built up. You just don't get to see the build-up of that society beyond its initial moments that in little glimpses, but that's very different than what I remember from the film for sure. It's pretty depressing. I mean, it's a horror sci-fi, right? It wasn't like, it was never gonna be like happy fun times. I don't know what to think. I think it's a very good book. I think it's interestingly written. I liked it. I mean, the pills were probably something that would kill him, right? Or something, you know, some sort of poison or something that would take him out or leave him unconscious. I don't know, something at least. I mean, he was gonna die regardless. Like, he was pretty much mortally shot. I think it was interesting the way they handled the Ruth character. But I'm not entirely sure why she felt so protective, she felt so caring and all that. I'm not sure if that really made much sense to me, since it wasn't like she was attention or human contact starved. She did just lose her husband, allegedly. It's interesting. There is like a short afterword. It's not very long. Afterwards by Stephen King. You might have heard of him. Yeah, that was what I was thinking too, Bo. Afterworth by Stephen King. To say that Richard Matheson invented the horror story would be as ridiculous to say that Elvis Presley invented rock and roll. What, the purist would scream about Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Stick McGee, the Robins, and a dozen others? The same is true in the horror genre, which is the equivalent of rock and roll, a quick hit to the head that bobs your nerves and makes hurt so good. Before Matheson came dozens, going back to the author of the Grendel story, and Mary Shelley, and Horace Walpole, and Edgar Allan Poe, and Bram Stoker, and H.P. Lovecraft, But I like rock and roll, or any other genre that skates across the nerve endings. Horror must constantly regenerate and renew itself or die. In the early 1950s, when Weird Tales was dying its slow death, and Robert Bloch, horror's greatest writer at the time, had turned to psychological tales, and at the same time Fritz Leiber, easily Bloch's equal, had fallen oddly silent for a time, and the genre was languishing the hoarse latitudes, Richard Matheson came like a bolt of pure ozone lightning. He single-handedly regenerated a stagnant genre, rejecting the convention of the pulps which were already dying, incorporating sexual impulses and images into his work as Theodore Sturgeon had already begun to do in his science fiction, and writing a series of gut-bucket stories that were like shots of white lightning. What do I remember about these stories? I remember what they taught me, the same thing rock and roll, most recent regenerator, Bruce Springsteen, articulates in one of his songs, "No retreat, baby, no surrender." I remember that Matheson would never give ground. When you thought it had to be over, that your nerves couldn't stand anymore, that was when Matheson turned on the afterburners and went into overdrive. He wouldn't quit. He was relentless. The baroque intonations of Lovecraft, the perfervid prose of the pulps, the sexual innuendos were all absent. You were faced with so much pure drive that only readings showed Matheson wit, cleverness, and control. When people talk about genre, I guess they mention my name first, but without Richard Matheson, I wouldn't be around. He's as much my father as Bessie Smith's was Elvis Presley's mother. He came when he was needed, and his stories held their original hypnotic appeal. Be warned, you are in the hands of a writer who asks no quarter and gives none. He will wring you dry, and when you close this volume, he will leave you with the greatest gift a writer can give. He will leave you wanting more. That's pretty interesting. I can kind of see where he's coming from as well. Okay, let's, there we go. It's on my bed, so it has a soft landing. I mean, it's when you have these stories of like kind of like these last man standing type of situations, it tends to be either, you know, like some sort of heroic victory, or either like a brutal sacrifice or something of the like, you know, like what you would come to expect of stories like that would be like, for example, like he finally at the last moment finalized his cure, and just before his death he dispersed it into the city and everyone would be cured and be able to return to their normal human lives or something. Or, you know, like what I mean with like a heroic sacrifice. But that's not what happened at all. It's more of a personal tale. Like nothing he did really accomplished anything, but he still went out with a sort of under a deeper understanding of not just the world around him, but of himself, which makes for a very interesting story. And it definitely doesn't adhere to like story writing conventions. Is that what you say? I don't know. I thought it was cool. Hey, Cody. So the last human, he should have gone out guns blazing. I don't know why. I mean, he kind of did. Like he like when he got like dragged out of his house, like he went in guns blazing, and then, you know, he I think he took one out, or at least hurt him, because he heard like a cry of pain. So in that way, like his last like confrontation, he went guns blazing, but it just didn't amount to much at all. And you know, it was just mere chance. Like, he could have just died, but he didn't die, which allowed him to have that final moment, that final moment of understanding, of realization. But it does leave you with kind of a sad feeling that, like, the futility of it all. Like, he dedicated his life to this only to, at the last moment, be so overwhelmed with what he didn't know, and what he didn't understand, and what he didn't and couldn't see, and to just understand that there was nothing he could do to change it. So there's definitely kind of like a tragic futility in that, especially if you combine it with the fact that this Ruth, that, you know, seemed to care about him in her own way. I mean, I definitely liked it, and it makes you think. That's what I like about story, when they make you think. Lately, I've been getting more into reading stuff like that. It really makes you think. I'm a big fan of Philip K. Dick, and he's written a couple books. I know Blade Runner. He wrote the story, well, the book that it was based upon, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which has definitely become one of my favorite books very quickly. And I've been reading some of his short stories. I have like his collected works basically. And they really make you think. They're really, I mean, I think it would be too easy to say like they're commentary on like society, but in a way they are. But it makes you think like more about the nature of humankind, the future, etc. I can definitely recommend Philip K. Dick. I'll probably, like I said, I have like a collected of his collected short stories. And Cass suggested that for the future of these streams, I would just read these short stories, which I think would work pretty well, because while I do love reading the book with you, I'm sure, you know, like, not everyone would be able to make it to everyone, or they might miss it, or, you know, come in later, etc. So I think that's what will work going forward. Are you guys excited for the new Blade Runner film? I'm tentatively excited. I only watched the first Blade Runner film like last year or something. I was pretty late to the party. I mean, I was born in the 90s, so I kind of missed a lot of 80s stuff, even though it's like my favorite decade, I guess. But it's good shit. Straight creepypastas. Yeah, I have like this love-hate relationship with creepypastas. I remember when I was younger, I would which story was that? Let me just Google it. Sorry for this, probably a little bit loud. Second Variety, that's the one. Yeah, I read Second Variety not too long ago. It has like a whole bunch, like 100 or something short stories. By the way, he also read Minority Report, which, you know, well, it was called The Minority Report, but the movie that was based on it is called Minority Report. And he also wrote the story that inspired the film Total Recall, which is We'll Remember It For You Wholesale. That's what the short story is called. So we might actually start with that one, because I haven't read the short story yet, and of course a lot of people have seen Total Recall, so... The Second Variety is one of those, like, stories such as, like, you know, gut-wrenchingly awful in, like, the absolute best way. I can probably read this one sometime too. It's a bit longer though. But yeah, let's see. Just the summary is: a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the West has reduced much of the world to a barren wasteland. The war continues, however, among the scattered remains of humanity. The Western forces have developed claws, which are autonomous, self-replicating robots to fight on their sides. It is one of Dick's many stories in which nuclear war has rendered the Earth's surface inhabitable. The story was adapted into the movie Screamers in 1995. I did not know that. We should watch that. Or I should watch that or whatever, but I did not know that. Yeah, there's that. It's actually so apparently it had like a really negative critical reaction, but it has a cult following. That's really cool. I did not know that. Yep, that's pretty much the story. It's cool. Huh. I'm gonna have to watch that. Ah, it's Fee. Oh yeah. We will do that too. But yeah, as I was saying, creepypastas, I kind of have like a love-hate relationship, because like when I was younger, like when I was like early teens, I would devour stuff like that. In general, I was like crazy fan of horror and of like even like torture porn, you know, movies like Saw and Hostel and stuff like that. I really just ate that shit up. But then like late in my teens, like early 20s, I kind of like got away from that, and it just started making me more uncomfortable. I think it's kind of related to like the anxiety issues that I started to develop at that time. And now like creepypasta, like that shit keeps me up at night in the worst way. Like it really freaks me out. So, but I know there's some creepypasta that are more like interesting and thought-provoking, as opposed to, you know, just pure brutal and scary and terrifying. So I think I'll have to like be on the lookout for some of those that are not necessarily like crazy terrifying, but more like hey Bo, I just saw you donated. I'm sorry that I didn't hear it because I wasn't looking at my screen, but thank you, Bo. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't catch that. Let's see. Oh, you actually you saw Screamers. So yeah, that's based on that Second Variety story. But yeah, I don't know. I just became like scared of a lot of stuff, but I do wanna read some more like, you know, happier short stories. I'm sure there are some cool fantasy ones that I can scrounge up. talking about fantasy, I actually finished Dragon Age Inquisition after like a long time. I kind of oversaturated myself with that game. I think I have like 150, probably more. How many hours? I have like a fuck ton of hours on that game, and I just played that like every day, day in and out when I was playing it, so I just completely like oversaturated myself with it. So I had to take a bit of a break, but then recently I picked it up again, and I didn't have much left. I only had like one DLC left, and then the end game, and then there was like, it's like an end game DLC that I played, and I really like the ending. I'm very curious to see what they're gonna do with Dragon Age 4 when it comes out, because there's definitely like a lot that's still going on. But at this moment, like at this point, like I'm also kind of hoping they're wrapping it up, because as much as I love Dragon Age games, and I think Dragon Age Inquisition is an absolute, it's just a masterpiece of fantasy role-playing games, in my opinion anyways. It's just so full of life and content and stuff like that, even though I felt like a lot of the side missions were getting a bit in like busy work, you know, territory, but most of them are completely optional. But yeah, I felt I kind of feel like at this point like they should kind of wrap up the story, but I think we're going to Winter, which is like one of the regions which I've been looking forward to. Winter's like in the Dragon Age universe. It's like this state, I guess, or country that's just completely ruled by evil magisters, which are like mages, like with extremely like a lot of political pull, and they're also like really into slave trade, so it's definitely some interesting story ventures that could take. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to that, but at the same time I do hope they kind of wrap it up, because it's getting a little bit convoluted. Bye-bye, Cody. I hope you have a good time with your family. Ooh, hi, Jackknife. Showing a friend from Pennsylvania around the coast. That sounds like a lot of fun. I hope you have a lot of fun with your friends. I haven't finished Andromeda. Yeah, you should finish Andromeda. It's, I thought it was pretty satisfactory ending. The end boss game was definitely an improvement over the third one, for sure. I don't know. I don't want to like give too much spoilers about Dragon Age, but I can definitely recommend it as a game. If you are not like necessarily opposed to games that look a little bit dated, I would recommend you start with Dragon Age Origins, which is a very, very deep and good roleplay experience if you're into role-playing games. It's just really good. The story is amazing, and you'll really understand all the struggles and stuff like that a lot more if you start with the first one. And then Dragon Age 2, even though it's mostly seen as the least interesting game in the series, I like Dragon Age 2. It can be a bit grindy at times, but Inquisition is the third game. It's really good. They're very different games, like all three. They have a very different feel to them, but they do have like kind of like that red thread of story and lore that just maintains its appeal throughout, I feel. There are dragons in Dragon Age, and you can fight and kill them in every game. There's a bunch in Dragon Age Inquisition, actually, and they're really cool. The Dragon Age, as the title, is actually a reference to the story at this moment in time being in the Dragon Age. Like the world is divided up in ages, and at the moment we're in the Dragon Age, where dragons are, you know, are real, basically. It's very good. Andromeda was a lot better than what the critics would make you believe. It got a lot of criticism, and a lot of it was founded, but a lot of it wasn't as well, I found. It's hard to really say, but I think a lot of it was just kind of like exaggerated, and everyone was jumping on the hate train. And the unfortunate results of that is that BioWare Montreal, which is where the studio that created the game, they at least have put like all DLC content and a sequel that they were going to make. They've just put that on like on hold indefinitely, which is such a shame because the story, you know, as much flaws as the gameplay had, the story I still thought was very interesting and cool. And it had a lot of loose threads that I was really looking forward to seeing explored more, but it seems like we might not ever get that, which does make me sad, and does make me a little bit annoyed at the internet hate machine. But yeah. I mean, people tend to do that. It's it's unfortunate that people tend to kind of not really have a nuanced stance towards things. It's either they fucking love it like with all their hearts and it can do no wrong, or they absolutely hate it and everything about it is like the worst thing ever invented. And there tends to be no in between, and the discourse tends to be like either way. And if you maintain some sort of neutrality, then your opinions and thoughts aren't really taken seriously, unfortunately. Yeah, that makes sense, yeah. Bo. Are all the dragons bad, or are there good dragons? It's hard to say. There are some dragons that you can actually free and not kill and not hurt. There's one dragon, but that's actually just a person who can shift into a dragon. They're good-ish. You don't have to kill them. You can be friends with them. But overall, like the wild dragons that you find, you can kill them optionally. The Wolfenstein franchise. I never really got into that. I'm not sure, like, what is the gameplay like? I'll have to admit, it's not something that I've really been looking into, but the name has garnered some interest for me. I'm pretty decent at getting immersed in video games. Like, when I get really into it, like I can play a game for like 16 hours a day easily for at least a while. It's FPS, okay. FPS is hit or miss for me. I like Mass Effect, obviously, but there are so many roleplay elements to it that, you know, the FPS isn't necessarily as like fleshed out as games that are primarily FPS. I'm not sure how the roleplay aspects are in Wolfenstein. I like the thematics of it and the aesthetic for sure from what I've seen. Yeah, that's the beauty about having my own schedule. I don't have like 9 to 5s, obviously, so I can kind of fill in my own schedule, and I can always fit in some gaming since I'm already home, you know. Like, what I'll often do is like I'll edit a video, and while it renders I can't do anything on my laptop, so I'll just play a game or watch a show for like an hour until it renders, and then I continue on with the work. So that's how I kind of fit in my hobbies. Yeah, like I've heard kind of like about the overall story. It's definitely interesting. Yeah. Anyway, does anyone have any ASMR trigger requests? I will happily do what I can within reason, of course. Just gonna carefully move this to the middle. There you go. There we go. Mic massage. I can do that. I find that this kind of sounds like outside. Is there anything else you would like me to do to relax you? anything else that you want me to do, let me know. Let's see. Just gonna take a sip. or some nail tapping. So much, Bo. Thank you. So yes, I will be going on vacation next week. In exactly 1 week, I will be almost landed in Canada, which is absolutely terrifying. The flying part, but it's gonna be good, I think. And as you know, I'm gonna be gone for a full month. I'll be flying out to 12, and I'll be flying back the 13th of September. It's a very long time, but it's gonna be good. And yes, I'll eat so many poutine, I'm pretty sure. But of course, as I've mentioned, there will be plenty of content told you all over it. And I'll be on social media, updating you on the goings-ons and stuff like that, I'm sure. I'll definitely let you all know that I'm landed safely. So yeah, thank you everybody so much for being here. I love having this moment with you all every month. I'll be flying KLM, which is the Dutch Royal Air Company. It's only like a 6 to 7 hour flight, so it's not too bad. But yeah, I'm gonna miss you all. I'm gonna miss working, crazy as that sounds. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all next month. But I'm not gone yet, obviously. I'm still gonna be here in Hollandia for another week. But I do hope that you all stay safe and you don't know what to do right now, because my stream is ending. Substance ASMR, aka Derek here, is having his stream in 10 minutes, so you can go watch that if you want. I'll be there too, just in chat. Okay guys, I love you so much, and I will see you in an hour.